I've talked about my liking of first-person platformers before in these reviews. If you've watched my Deadcore video, you'll know that it delivered quite a lot of what I wanted, but it was discovering Clustertruck that led me there, and it actually sent me on a small hunt for good first and third-person platformers on the PC in the meanwhile. I found a handful. Clustertruck is a unique beast, however, a platformer centered around riding a convoy of trucks through short obstacle courses, where survival of the trucks is not guaranteed, and your own survival even less so. I was immediately interested. I applied and luckily got into the closed alpha, and I later played their open build. But save for that, I went blackout, which is something that's hard to do, considering I was subbed to the developer's YouTube channel. And the developer Landfall loves Unity, and hates the idea of people going in any way blind. I've beaten the game twice, replayed a great many of the worlds in differing conditions, and I recorded it all of course, but I'm confident I could have just made a Frankenstein's monster of a playthrough from all of their pre-release footage. Still, Clustertruck has been a good time, the spin it puts on platforming is well handled. I do have some minor issues with it, which we'll be getting to, but as far as platformers go, it provides a good challenge in making jumps, situational awareness, timing, and trying to predict where the hell your ground will be. Part platformer, part gambling, it's a chaotic ride filled with split-second decision-making and high-speed hijinks. It's also a short game, however, first playthrough clocked in at just under 3 hours, but that short length may actually be for the best. It doesn't outstay its welcome, and it already starts getting difficult to the point of annoyance nearing the end. The supplied level editor will hopefully lead to some fun community creations down the line to give it a greater longevity, as it seems to be quite a flexible suite. Lots of tools and options and stuff to set. Someone recreate Desert Bus in there for me. There's probably a way. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty straightforward. You start at the rear of a horde of trucks barreling through an obstacle course, and it's your job to survive to the other end, making careful leaps, judging distances and avoiding obstacles, and hoping that if the truck you're on gets totaled, that you've got a few backups in jumping distance, because the floor will kill you, the bottomless pits will kill you, the trucks will get you killed, and your own hesitation to push forward will kill you harder. It's in the recent Super Meat Boy style of platformer level design, compact, difficult stages, with no checkpoints and an instant restart. Death is therefore frequent, but an individual stage should not take a great deal of time to clear. I'd rank it as easy in quite a number of those kind of platformers, however. The trucks are the angle that Landfall has brought to the table. While the stages are fixed, your floor is not. It's semi-consistent. You can glide through a level with relative ease or end up in an unwinnable state. So a new player has to make a bit of a tacit agreement or know what this game is going to be to fully enjoy it. At times, you can win a stage with relatively very little effort. Some stages you can switch trucks at leisure and hang back, possibly even taking one truck through the whole stage. This gets rarer as we go on, but playing slowly is definitely doable here and there. Other times, even when playing well, even repeating actions that worked before, you will lose. And it may be through no fault of your own. The game's selling point, and indeed much of its spectacle, comes from the fact that it can turn into a multi-truck pile-up at any moment. I noted in my alpha video that the game was impressively consistent, and that's still true, however. Stages rarely play out in a way that is completely unwinnable. You may strand yourself at times, but at least a couple of trucks will likely clear the finish line, with or without you. Control-wise, Clustertruck keeps things very straightforward, but the movement mechanics may take some adjusting to. It's WASD to move, a sprint button mapped to shift, which meant my pinky was in use for about 80% of my playtime, only occasionally taken off for very fine movement. And there are 2 equipable ability slots, either triggered under certain conditions, or bound to one of the mouse buttons. If you've played in any of the alphas, the movement has gone through some more iteration. The closed alpha felt very restrictive, even making simple jumps was relatively terrifying. A later movement patch opened it up to an incredible degree. You had insane mid-air control. Now, I praise the former's controls for making you a near-complete passenger in the chaos, and I don't entirely stand by that way of thinking anymore, particularly with the release of the full game. Some of the stages on offer here would be near unplayable, and the challenges overall would need to be far more simplistic to compensate. The final release has hit a bit of a middle ground, still heavily momentum-based, but with enough movement possible in the air to correct yourself. If you jump while on a truck, you carry its speed. If you leap forwards off of it, you dart ahead. You can hold back to slow yourself down to stop yourself from overshooting, but you can't come to a dead stop in the air. But it allows for very quick movement, and it becomes very satisfying to land long jumps, and it makes each leap feel skillful and considered without being terrifying, hitting a sweet spot between challenge and accessibility. The limited air control means that minor mistakes can be salvaged, but if you're off by too much, you're more than likely fucked. What this leads to if you play like I do, i.e. sprinting through stages as quickly as possible, essentially slingshotting yourself from truck to truck, it manages to create a fluid feeling of momentum, but it's actually done on a truck-by-truck basis. You can come to a dead stop if you land on a truck and don't keep going. Every part of the truck counts as safe, and just hitting them gives you the ability to jump and climb, so landing on the sides of the trailer lets you shoot forward relatively quickly, while hitting and climbing the back can lead to a big vertical boost. So you can actually aim for parts of the trucks, opportunity and reflexes permitting, to do different kinds of leaps, but they are riskier to pull off. It's both a positive and a negative, however, but all of this makes you feel like you exist in a kind of slipstream around the trucks. It can make the controls feel a little bit floaty and loose on the smaller and finer movements, occasionally leading to slipping off of trucks or overshooting, or hitting the back of a truck only for it to not properly catch, leading to a death. Still, overall things are responsive and speedy, and they keep up well with the incredible paces the player can gain and the shifting fortunes of the trucks without trivializing things. You can turn on a dime if you reorient yourself while on a truck, but it takes one mistimed or poorly aimed leap to spell doom. Clustertruck for me can be at its best when it's nearing its worst, when the game throws a spanner in the works and you have to quickly readjust, either because the path you were taking was just closed to you, or you see a sudden random opportunity for points, a shortcut, or big air. Part of why it's so cool to do all this stuff is that the random nature means there is no safety net. Okay, that's not entirely true. There are a number of unlockable abilities which can provide a bit of insurance, purchased via trick points earned by doing tricks in the course of play, or earned on clearing stages. The abilities are ultimately good, but I do have mixed feelings about them, mixed as in I unlocked at least a new one per world on my first playthrough, felt that the abilities were less power-ups and more lifelines, felt like they were the only thing letting me clear certain stages, and felt like they were by and large underpowered. On my first time through the game, I felt all of these things, occasionally holding these somewhat contradictory thoughts at the same time, save for one power-up. Abilities are split into two categories, movement and utility, and one of each can be equipped at any one time. Movement powers at first come in abilities that aid in navigation, a double jump, air dashes, a jetpack, levitation, and grappling hooks. The way the game generally balances these goes in one of two directions. They can be used regularly, but are fairly weak, or are incredibly useful, but have an incredibly long recharge. On most stages you'll get one or maybe two uses out of them unless you're moving at a very leisurely pace. The more I played the game, the more I realised these abilities aided more in opening up new routes or skipping parts of a stage, rather than pulling my arse out of the fire. While that makes them very rewarding and lends some nuance to them, it's less helpful for those adjusting or those who don't want to run a stage over and over again. I thought air dashes or the double jump would let me get a better handle on manipulating momentum, but the air dash is unwieldy for saving yourself, and the double jump is near imperceptible at first. It maintains your momentum, and it gives you a tiny amount of lift, so the only option is to get better at jumping. The jetpack does let you reorient yourself somewhat, but it has a pitiful amount of fuel, and the grappling hook requires really good aim, as if you hit the back of a truck, all you've really done is delay death. Essentially, they don't put you above the chaos. They may occasionally save you, but they're better used once you have a good handle on the basics, and I love and hate that about them. Let's move over to utility momentarily, and let's just get this out of the way. Slow motion is by far and away the most useful ability for everything but speedrunning. It recharges quickly, not only slows down the action, but it also slows momentum, so it gives you greater mid-air control. Invaluable for when in a tight spot, for watching the chaos unfold, or for planning your next move, or both. Turning off slow motion and playing without it felt like taking the training wheels off. None of the other abilities are even in the same league. That's why I think it's a pretty good choice that it's one of the cheapest unlocks, despite being so much better. It's a great power to ease people in. Every other utility is either a gimmick mode, or just plain less useful. Backtrack returns you to the last truck you were stood on. Portable Truck gives you a grenade to create a stationary platform. While I don't find Backtrack enjoyable, I think Portable Truck is too weak for its own good. The trucks you put down are stationary and they have a long recharge. It's occasionally handy, but I wouldn't take either of these over slow motion for both enjoyment and usability, though both of them might combo well with the upcoming truck boost. Truck Salute Zero is one of the most mechanically interesting, but I found it awkward to use. That's more on me than the game, however. It freezes trucks in place, even blockading traps. With better timing than me, it would probably be useful, and this ability does bridge the gap to the more gimmicky stuff. Let's start with what I'd consider my favourite ability, the Movement Power Truck Boost. Exactly what it sounds like. It blasts whichever truck you are standing on in the direction it's facing. Not the most useful power, but incredibly flexible and an absolute blast to use. It just fucks everything up. You can use it as a setup for a long jump, or to speed past an obstacle, or wait for a truck to be facing upwards for massive air, or just to create a fucking pile-up. This ability does call into focus how few of your abilities are actually based around manipulating the trucks. I'd have totally traded double jumps for a power that launches a truck as the basis for a double jump. Or, rewinding trucks, or truck magnetism, or truck grenades actually making a movement truck, or a gun that fires trucks. Considering how some of the jump powers overlap with subtle nuances, I'd have taken variants on the truck boost. This also brings us to Super Truck and Trucker Flip, or to give them more simple names, Easy and Hard mode. I want to enjoy Super Truck, but it just doesn't mesh well with me. Granted, I do play this game with Space W and Shift held down, so it's basically a palette swap for me. It's super hot in truck form. A nice idea, the trucks only move when you move, so you've got all the time in the world to look around. But what do I do when I make it to the front row? I walk around in a circle, waiting for the game to move on. It's not bad, it's just not to my taste, and as an optional gimmick, it's a nice shout out even if I don't think it works. It's alright for watching the pile-ups happen, but gameplay-wise, it's pretty flat. Trucker Flip is the opposite. You can't just jump from trucks anymore. You've grown cooler than that. You kickflip them, sending them spiraling forward, smashing into everything ahead. For the most part, wiping out the only things keeping you alive. So you now need to plan a couple of jumps ahead, and you get to watch more stuff crash. After my first playthrough, I did do a pure run of the game. An achievement did advertise that it was possible to beat the game without any abilities, and seeing as at times I felt dependent on them, I wanted to know for myself if I was capable of it. And what was actually quite surprising, that save for just having had more time to get used to the game, how enjoyable it is without any abilities. It felt less distracting actually, more straightforward and intense. So, as you can see, not all of the abilities are straight upgrades, a few of them are mutators applied on top of the game, and it did make me want for more of these. The selection is weird in this regard. It's a good number of very disparate moves that made me want for expansion. Now, I know there is Twitch integration, and I believe there are some exclusive abilities left up for viewer voting, and I do realise with the inherent unfairness and chaos of the game, that it was at least partially made so that a certain kind of person can shriek incoherently over it. Now, while I realise they're probably more entertaining than the pre-recorded loser that's me, I want to play these too. All of these abilities are purchased with trick points. The tricks are a bit underwhelming, however. While I didn't do it, I can't blame people for using an easy points stage to just skip the process of unlocking all of these. After my first playthrough, I hadn't earned enough for all of them, and after a second time around, I had enough points banked to purchase all but a couple. I don't know the full extent of the tricks list. My main source of points came from airtime, leaping from airborne trucks, a speed bonus gained from clearing a stage quickly, and acing stages, a flat bonus for clearing a stage without any resets. This could be done when replaying a stage. And lastly, a bonus for clearing a whole world. You can rotate the camera in a flip motion, but it doesn't award points, so I've no idea if it's an oversight or it's just meant to be there, but they didn't do anything with it. Now, I like the idea of points being in this game to incentivize risky play, but airtime and hopping seem to be the only two tricks. And even then, gaining airtime outside of sections that naturally force big air was infrequent. Plus, once you've bought everything, there's no longer any point to that score outside of a cosmetic thing. This game does have a leaderboard at the end of stages, but it's ranked purely on time, with scores tacked on afterwards, and you'll usually see quite a low score alongside the top times. Partly because those are hacked at the moment, which is really a more risky trick than anything I can do, so it's a little unfair, really. Still, the time board is alright. I do like that you can load up people's ghosts to see how they do it. How do they do it? I can understand why score is irrelevant besides. The only way to get a high score is for the most part to play relatively slowly. You'd have to pace yourself out and refuse to hit the end for a big payoff of airtime, and the score would essentially be somewhat up to random chances. Sometimes the game will topple more trucks to dive to and from. Slow motion is also taken into account on speedruns. Even when in slow motion, the clock is ticking in real time. There is one last ability in the form of Epic Mode. It doubles score gain. It's one of the most expensive modes and partially useless since it was one of the last things I got, essentially relegating it to a screen filter. Plus, I've made it to the point of hating the word epic in at least 90% of the context in which it's used. It's weird to get to stages last in a review of a platformer, but well, here we are. 9 worlds with 10 stages each with a different theme and a couple of unique traps or gimmicks. It does default back to standard set pieces semi-often. Swinger traps, obstacle courses, occasionally a test of momentum with jumping a huge gorge. It cycles through traps incredibly often and has a very good variety, but only a couple of worlds seem to expand on their unique set pieces a great deal. My favourite worlds were Medieval, Ancient, and Laser. Medieval felt the most video gamey, running along castle walls lined with traps, swingers, shunters, lifters, flamethrowers, and then it used them in conjunction with each other. It somehow also felt the most straightforward, but also the most chaotic and random. Ancient had the greatest focus on road switching, and only near the end did it get its own traps in the form of rolling boulders to go along with this. Laser tries every pattern of laser under the sun, and it also had the greatest focus on tight timing, either tests of speed or forcing a distinct pace through its stages. But this also gives it the least replayability. It's the least random outside of its bizarre spinning laser canyon disco finale. Throughout the game there are a handful of gotcha moments that will more likely than not kill first time players, not due to a lack of skill, but due to them just not knowing what's coming up. The short stages make this manageable, but the random nature of the gameplay can make figuring out progress a bit of a toss of the dice, bashing your head against a wall until a solution makes itself known, or at times being in the right place while your truck is not. Quite a number of stages are also timed in some way, and this is not a negative. It's a good thing that you can't coast through a majority of Clustertruck. It forces snap decision making. Some force you to play at their pace, and I'm impressed with how in sync the trucks feel with the level at times. The timing was never unfair, and even when pressured, you tend to flow quite naturally with the stage if you keep to a forward spot on whatever convoy you're riding. The game can also feel inconsistent about what will kill you though. It's generally everything. Even lightly brushing most walls will kill you outright. Jumping over and past obstacles can feel iffy and terrifying because you have no idea how tall or wide you are. This is one of the drawbacks of first person, I'm afraid. On the other hand, you can latch on to some traps and just hold on to them until the trucks catch up with you. I'm not entirely sure the developers were clear on the limitations of their own controls. It's great for moving from high-speed object to high-speed object. That's where it's comfortable. The more slow-paced or static challenges were ironically the hardest moments in the game due to how fidgety the controls become when you're on a stationary object. This custom stage here is designed to be difficult, but I didn't find it enjoyable since the controls are floaty and awkward. Creating your own momentum requires what feels like frame-perfect timing. As you hit an object, you have to spin and jump perfectly to the next object. It's weird and awkward and I never got the timing down, and this game wants you to do it several times perfectly in a row. I had a strange and unfair feeling when I cleared Clustertruck for the first time, and I'm sure if you've also played the game you'll know why. The final stage is more akin to a platforming boss fight than anything else, and it was also nerfed a day after I had played the game on Pure. You ride a line of trucks down a circular road. The big demon punches the track, so you have to dart down this awkwardly turning line ahead of it. And then at the peak of the road, he'll open up a pathway leading up his body to a switch. You hit it, get launched sky high, and the track resets. You have to do this 3 times. If that doesn't sound too bad, just you wait. First off, a single row of trucks. They're unlikely to topple, but it's not impossible. They can also careen off to the side wall, and lightly brushing that is death. Then you have to scale the beast. All the trucks are inches from the demon's body. And it's here you'll learn just how slippery the controls are as you run up this line of trucks. You gain an uncomfortable amount of speed, and on more than one occasion, I made it to the end of the first line, only to keep shooting forward and falling off to my death. Now you may ask, well, why rush? Well, that's because lava is also rising as you ascend. This turn is also really badly designed. I do not have a doubt in my mind that some players made it to this turn and then were like, okay, what the fuck do I do now? Then you get up to the button and you hit it, or miss by a hair and die. Also, I've mentioned how you climb trucks if you hit them side on. Well, that's not always true, and with the speed that you're going at and the awkward layout of the trucks, it's more than possible to get yourself in a fucky situation and fall to your death. And you are launched sky high as the stage resets, and now you have to hope that you don't overshoot a single row of trucks, and hope that your fall lines up with the trucks below to begin with. So yeah, it's definitely a step up in challenge from everything that came before, but having to succeed 3 times felt far too much like a ridiculous mixture of luck over skill. This game has no mid-stage checkpoints, let me remind you. It's also a bit of an underwhelming finale besides that. Save for a change in music, it's not incredibly bombastic, just frustrating and dull. Both times I cleared this stage, I caught myself sighing aloud. Likely in relief it was over, I'm not sure, because both times this was brought on unconsciously. So yeah, I had mixed feelings when I finished this level, because while I was assuming that it was the finale, I had 2 conflicting ideas. Was that it? And I hope that's it. I don't want them trying to be tougher, they'll be bad at it. But besides that, most of the stages are fine, a majority of them are fine. But overall, the campaign didn't have me comparing Clustertruck, bizarrely or maybe appropriately enough, to Superhot. I have written this comparison into my review several times, removed it, moved it elsewhere, reworded it a ton, because while it makes sense to me in my head, the moment it's down in front of me and I read it, it just feels unfair. But then again, so did that final stage, so let's go ahead. Both Clustertruck and Superhot are reasonably short games with tight stages, with a unique twist on their respective genres, and a selection of modifiers to apply over their core gameplay. After I cleared Clustertruck, I felt a sense of dissatisfaction that I think many had with Superhot. Now, while I did want more Superhot after I cleared it, and I felt that it was on the short side, I also felt the gameplay had been explored very well. It presented situations that no other games could present as it did. Clustertruck struck a similar chord, but save for a few stages and power-ups, the trucks were sort of just there. Occasionally they throw trucks at each other, occasionally you have to fight up a tidal wave of trucks, since one at the end is carrying the goalpost. Once in a while, it uses its own trappings to trick the player in a creative way. For the most part, however, it was a lot of platforming tropes I've seen, remixed with trucks. By the same token, it was fun to clear those courses, so it's an issue at the back of my mind that ideally will go away with time. That, and going back to the comparison with Superhot, they are different games by different people with different ideas of what is and isn't fun, working in different genres. The core concept is unique enough, but there's very little wrong with driving it through familiar territory. If there are ever DLC level packs or a sequel or some such, I'd like to see things like world-specific trucks to help each world distinguish itself a bit better, such as reflective trucks for laser stages, perhaps time bombs on steampunk, or trucks pulling catapults on medieval stages to create more chaos or hazards to keep mindful of. More abilities or level-specific power-ups to lend influence over trucks. I think one thing this game could actually do to help push its unique gameplay is to actually use older gameplay staples like power-ups to do this. The truck grenades, for instance, would work well in this regard without greatly increasing the complexity, as the truck grenades are already not a great replacement for any other utility. Downgrade them, but keep them. This is an early on review, so time will tell what comes from the community map maker. I've played a handful of stages to get a taster, but it's far too early to judge. Clustertruck is an unfair game. Early on it can feel woefully unfair, but it's a fun ride and gradually you start to fall into its rhythm. It starts fun because it's a thrill to watch shit crash and burn, and survive by the skin of your teeth. As the challenge ups, you start to get better. I've done a wee bit of speedrunning, nothing that will top the charts, nor the top of the people not cheating charts, but it's rewarding to dart through a stage, getting into the low hundreds, occasionally getting into the tens. If you enjoy platformers, I can definitely recommend Clustertruck for its unique nature and decent controls. If you're not one for platformers, I can still recommend it on premise. It's challenging, but I wouldn't call it incredibly hard. It's not a game selling itself on crushing difficulty to appeal to masochists, and it's fun to just watch it play out besides. Some of it can feel a little bit half-baked, but it's very much a fun game overall.